This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
The NFL season is beginning today. I'm kind of wondering a little bit in that last segment why college football fans sometimes refuse to watch the NFL. I know there's a lot of people that will watch a high school game on Friday. We'll watch the NFL game Thursday. High school Friday. All day Saturday they'll watch college football, and all day Sunday, and then get in the Monday night game. But there are those folks, and you know some of them too, I'm sure, who want to watch the amateur game, even though college football isn't really amateur anymore, and eschew the NFL, maybe for political reasons that came up a couple of years ago. But I think before that, they might have probably not paid very much close attention to the NFL too. If you're a football fan, why not watch the game at its absolute best? I understand college football might be a little crazier, a little tougher to predict, but NFL football is, played at its absolute best, right?
Well, yeah, it's the highest level, just like, some people like college basketball over the NBA. I mean, I like college basketball. I like to watch the NBA, too. The NBA players are the best in the world, but I think sometimes their travel schedules are so crazy it dilutes the games a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, I tell you, it was weird. I think it was Tuesday, and then last night there was no football to watch. I remember thinking, wow, this is really terrible, because going back to Thursday night with college, you had college games Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. I think 5 days in a row you had college games. And so that was it was almost like, oh, gosh, there's no college games on Tuesday and Wednesday, but, you can't play every night of the week, I don't think, although maybe that'll happen sometime with TV. But, yeah, I certainly like watching all forms of football. And, the NFL maybe could be more unpredictable. I mean, you can have lopsided scores in the NFL, but, you very rarely do you see an NFL team beat another one by, 24 points or 30 points or somewhere. It happens quite a bit in college when teams are mismatched. Doesn't happen much in the NFL. But, yeah, I think I saw somebody tweet. It was just someone, but I didn't necessarily follow. I'm not even sure why I showed up on my timeline, but I'd rather watch in person. I'd rather watch a MAC game than the NFL. And I'm like, well, okay, whatever. I think I'd rather watch an NFL game than a MAC game. Not that a MAC game's bad to watch, but yeah, I think everybody should be excited the NFL season's back.
Well, I mean, I think it helps when you've got a team to root for and that you feel invested in, to be a fan of that professional sport. Maybe that's one reason why I haven't watched as much Major League Baseball in the last few years, because the Pirates are unwatchable. There's plenty of other guys to watch, but I want to have a rooting interest, and it's tough to pick a team to root for instead of a team to root against. I don't have an NBA team. Haven't for years, since probably the early 90s Celtics. NHL is kind of the same thing. You need a team to root for. Is that about the same in the NFL? You kind of feel like you need a team to root for, and then you can buy into watching and buying into the rest of the stories in the league?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a Packers fan for as long as I can remember, so obviously I like to root for the Packers, and they've been pretty successful. Wish they'd won a couple more Super Bowls with Aaron Rodgers, but at least they won one. And also you can root, like I love rooting against the Bears and the Vikings, The Lions, I don't know, rooting against them almost. I mean, they may be better this year. I was watching them on Hard Knocks last night. You can get your NFL fix that way, too, watching Hard Knocks. Yeah, I think it helps to have a team, and then you could also root against that team's rivals. So you might say, the Bears are playing, New England or something. Well, I guess it's hard to root for New England. Let me think of somebody else. So the Bears are playing the Jets. Well, you can root for the Jets because, you don't like the Bears. So you sort of have a rooting interest there. And then I'm kind of like you in baseball. I'm a Tigers fan, and it's been a pretty depressing season. I remember looking at the AL Central standings, thinking, if the Tigers were just playing 500 ball, they'd be right there. And I think the expectation was they'd do that, and they've been terrible. They've had injuries and guys that had to take leave of absences and fired their GM who deserved to be fired. Now, hopefully they'll get a good GM in there that can get things going. But yeah, every time I get a little interested in the Tigers, they'll do something, they'll have some terrible loss. It just makes me think, why am I even following this team? But, you once they're your team, they're always your team.
Well, let's get into this Arkansas-South Carolina matchup, and this is I imagine this is one of the first battles of two Kirby Smart assistants going against each other. I know Kirby just coached against one of his assistants, and Dan Lanning, and that didn't go very well for Oregon. But he's got a small coaching tree. He's got a couple of branches that are facing each other this weekend. I think his connection to Sam Pittman might be a little bit longer than his connection to Shane Beamer. But I know that's also something that he talked about on the SEC teleconference yesterday.
Yeah, he's kind of like starting, everybody's talking about Nick Saban's coaching tree, which includes Kirby Smart for a long time, but Kirby's starting to get his own coaching tree. The Michigan State coach coached with him, also coached with Saban, Mel Tucker. But, those two guys were both, Shane Beamer and Sam Pittman were both on the 2017 Georgia staff when Georgia won the SEC title, beat Oklahoma, where Beamer went the next year, beat Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl in the playoff semis, and then took Alabama to overtime before Tua hit that incredible pass, the second and 26 play, I think it'll always be known as. And I think you see similarities. If you look at the 14 coaches in the SEC, 12 of them got hired. Either they were head coaches at other schools and they got hired, or they were off. That's pretty much the standard. Usually you hire a sitting head coach, you hire a guy that's been a coordinator. And the two exceptions of that are Sam Pittman and Shane Beamer. Sam was offensive line coach at Georgia, got the Arkansas job. Shane Beamer was a coordinator, a special teams coordinator, which honestly, does not carry the same weight usually as a defense or offense coordinator. And then he was the tight ends coach at Oklahoma, I think it was. And then they both got head coaching jobs. And so Shane Beamer got asked about that on the call yesterday, and he pointed out that, what it shows you is, I don't think he's trying to run down offensive or defense coordinators, but if you call plays on offense or defense, it doesn't mean you're automatically going to be a great head coach. And if you don't do that, it doesn't mean you can't be a head coach, which, being a head coach is a lot about being organized, being able to put a good staff together, having a great recruiting plan, being a good fit for that school. And Sam Pittman's obviously been a great fit for Arkansas, and Shane Beamer had been just like Sam had been at Arkansas previously, Shane as an assistant. Shane Beamer had been at South Carolina previously as an assistant. And so those guys, I think, based on how they're doing, obviously it's a small sample size. Sam's in his third season and Beamer's in his second season, but they've turned those programs around. Those are not easy places to win in the SEC traditionally. And so right now they look like two really good hires.
Mm-hmm. Well, with Arkansas this week, I think one of the question marks is now that you have Dominic Johnson back, how is that ball going to be distributed between that running back room? Kind of, what are your thoughts, and how do you think it's going to be distributed? I don't think it's going to be as heavy as Rocket Sanders, but do you cut Rockets back a lot, especially after coming off of a 117-yard game?
Well, one thing we don't. Dominic Johnson did have the green shirt, the green no contact jersey off on Wednesday or on Tuesday, and that's a good sign. And that means he's getting closer. What Sam Pittman told us yesterday was that, he didn't rule out. He certainly didn't say he won't play, but he didn't guarantee he would either. He said it kind of depends on how he does these next couple days, and it's going to be, largely up to Dominic Johnson how he feels. But if you get him back in the rotation, obviously he needs to get some carries. And so I think Rocket Sanders had 18 the other day. I might be wrong about that. And a lot of it depends on how much, Arkansas is able to control the ball and run it. What if they're looking to run the clock out or if they really got the running game going. But I still think Rocket Sanders is going to be your lead back. If they get Dominic Johnson in there and get some carries too. But, A.J. Green, Sam Pittman talked about him really showing his speed the other day. And then, Dubion, the freshman, had some very nice plays, had a really good catch and run on a screen play. So we'll see what happens there, but I still think Rocket Sanders is going to be your main guy.
Mm-hmm. In your opinion, how well does Arkansas's defense match up against South Carolina? We talked about it for most of the week, how accurate Spencer Rattler is on the run. That deep offensive line, isn't up to even I think the SEC par. I don't think it's as good of a line that you saw against Cincinnati. On the defensive side of the ball for Arkansas, how would you attack this thing? Because there is kind of that conversation of, well, do you stick with 4-man, which what we saw a lot against Cincinnati, or do you just go back to 3, put 6 in the defensive back, especially with the likelihood of Catalon and Slusher being back is still up in the air?
Well, yeah, they're obviously banged up in the secondary. We don't know exactly, at least I don't claim to know exactly what the situation is with those guys, but it's safe to say Arkansas is banged up and they're having to mix and match, playing some, playing maybe giving guys that might start some guys who didn't start last week, and guys are going to play more reps than they did. But I wouldn't be surprised we'll see some 4-man front. Cincinnati said that kind of caught them off guard because Arkansas had been primarily 3-man front the year before, but I think they feel really good about their depth on the defensive line. I mean, you look at Jordan Dominic. I mean, he comes off the bench and he's a co-defensive lineman of the week in the SEC because he had that big strip sack play and recovered the ball. And they look like they're Terry Hampton really did a good job, and of course they had their starters. So it looks like the line's pretty deep. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go 4-man line there. But they also might want to mix it up, give South Carolina some different looks. But I think it's important they get some heat on Shane Rattler because the secondary is banged up, and you don't want him to be able to sit back there and pick you apart.
Isn't it funny how narratives can change pretty quickly, really over the course of 1 week? The questions about Arkansas's defensive line depth became a strength after 1 week, really. I mean, we went by some of the things that the coaches talked about Terry Hampton, about Dominic, about Landon Jackson during preseason camp. You don't really know until you get your eyes on it, on a game, and that's exactly, another thing that Sam Pittman and the coaches talked about. But it's the same with the wide receivers. I mean, you went into the offseason wondering if there's enough depth at wide receiver. It certainly appears that there is, and it certainly appears that the front 4, who are going to be rotating in and out, pretty heavily, that the defensive line also is not just a strength, but a position of depth. Do we make too much of that after 1 week?
I don't think so. It might be different if they had played a lousy team, frankly. Like nobody to put anybody down. But you look at some of the teams at the SEC, and they had dominant wins, but you're still not really sure how good they are. At least I'm not. But you feel pretty good about Arkansas being a quality Cincinnati team. I mean, I don't know exactly what Cincinnati's record's going to end up being on paper. I think they could win out, but I think they're a quality team. I know they lost a lot of good players, but that was a really good win. That was one of the best wins in the country, that Arkansas had over Cincinnati last week. And so I think you can take some if you're Arkansas, you can feel good about what your guys did. And, I do think they have good depth on the line, good depth in that receiving core. Those were 2 areas of question marks. But, I mean, there's a reason they brought in those transfers. And that shows you how much the transfer portal can help. And, you look at those guys, they brought in, linemen from LSU and Georgia Tech and Arkansas State. I know Arkansas State's in the Sun Belt, but Terry Hampton, proved he's ready to play on the SEC level, I think. He was everybody talked him up all camp, And then you look at those receivers, they're getting receivers from OU, and Matt Landers came in from Toledo, but he started off at Georgia, and he really seems to be hitting his stride now. But he was obviously had a lot of potential, else Georgia wouldn't have signed him, 3 years ago, whenever that was. So, we didn't receive the freshman receivers. It'll be interesting to see those guys because I'm sure they're going to have to play at some point. But I think Arkansas had one of the best wins in the country last week, and they're and they showed their depth, and they have better depth in the secondary. Not that it's good to lose guys like Slusher and Catalan, but they were better able to absorb that. One of the guys they played, Brainy, was a starter at Georgia last year. So they have better depth now than that they've had in the past.
Well, last thing here, and I want to get your perspective on 11 o'clock kickoffs. Sam Pittman has been up front about trying to exhort the Arkansas fan base to show up. He says he knows that they will, but he still asks them because you could see the effect of the fans against Cincinnati. Alabama and Texas are playing at 11 o'clock too. Big noon kickoff on Fox. That's going to be the number one Big Ten game. Are our ideas about 11 a.m. Central Time kickoffs going to change, or do they have to change? Because it does seem that if the Big Ten's going to put their best game at 11 o'clock Central, the SEC may kind of answer, and ESPN wants to battle for that time slot too. And maybe 11 o'clock kickoffs don't mean what they used to mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm selfish. I like 11 a.m. kickoffs because it makes it easier on our deadline. I kind of like the idea of getting up, getting there, getting to the stadium. These games are getting longer and longer. I usually factor in 4-hour game, and with just the scoring and the replay reviews. I mean, I pretty much figure it's going to be a 4-hour game, and if it's less than that, I'm pleasantly surprised. So, and then that thing is the game's over, and then, fans obviously can go do whatever and watch other games, and we get done with our work and can go have dinner and watch other games. So I personally like the 11 a.m. games, and I think the fans are getting more used to them. Sam Pittman's referenced when Arkansas was ranked in the top 10 last year and went to Georgia at 11 a.m. kickoff. That was a huge game. Georgia was number 2 at the time. I think Arkansas was 8. And, Georgia had a full house and very raucous crowd. He's kind of been talking that, like, hey, Arkansas fans need to do what Georgia fans did. And I remember Joe Castiglione, the OU AD, I think I got this right, when the OU was renewing their series with Nebraska, obviously a longtime Big 8 rival, it was going to be on Fox, and he wanted a primetime night slot, and Fox wouldn't do it for him. And I think that was apparently a factor in OU saying, well, we're out of here. But he's going to have to play some 11 a.m. games in the SEC too. And I don't think I know in the Chad Morris years, people looked at, all these 11 a.m. games Arkansas got relegated to because they weren't any good. And maybe if you're on C-SPAN or something at 11 a.m., yeah, that's not a good sign. But if you're playing on Fox or ESPN or one of the big networks, sometimes CBS has had 11 a.m. games. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. People just have to set their clocks, kind of their body clocks, and I guess their alarm clocks a little bit earlier. But I personally like 11 a.m. games, but like I say, that part of that's just my selfishness for deadlines.
Well, in my old age, I'm going to be up in time to get there whenever I need to anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's 11 o'clock. I'd be fine with it. And Bob, we'll see you there at Razorback Stadium Saturday. Thank you so much.
BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports, contests, and events with first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to join today and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BELIEVE50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. BetOnline, where the game starts.